The medals glinted under the harsh fluorescent lights as the judge held them up like evidence in a murder trial. Silver star, bronze star with Valor, purple heart with 3 oak leaf clusters, each one earned in blood, sweat, and classified operations that would never see the light of day. But in Judge Harrison's hand, they looked like cheap costume jewelry from a pawn shop. "Miss Carter," Judge William Harrison said, his voice dripping with disdain as he set the medals back on his bench with a metallic clink that echoed through the silent courtroom. "These are serious federal charges. Stolen valor carries a sentence of up to 6 months in federal prison and substantial fines. And frankly, looking at you right now, I find it insulting that you think anyone in this courtroom would believe these are real." Maya Carter stood perfectly still at the defendant's table, her shoulders squared despite the oversized orange jumpsuit that hung off her small frame like a tent. Her dark hair was pulled back into a regulation bun that had gone slightly loose during her 3 days in county lockup. Her face showed no emotion. Ooh. Not defiance, not fear, just the blank mask of someone who had learned long ago that showing weakness was a luxury she couldn't afford. Behind the judge, the American flag hung motionless in the stale air. In the gallery, a handful of spectators shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the kind of case that usually drew a crowd. E0, just another homeless veteran claiming honors she clearly never earned. At least, that's what everyone thought. What none of them knew was that in exactly 7 minutes and 34 seconds, the heavy courtroom doors would explode open. A man would walk in wearing dress greens so pristine they looked like they'd been forged in steel, with enough ribbons on his chest to shame a small country's entire military. And when he spoke Maya's real name, Ao, her operational call sign that had struck fear into the hearts of terrorists across 3 continents, wow, this sleepy Tuesday morning in a forgotten courthouse would become the day an American hero was finally recognized. But for now, Maya Carter was just another fraud, another stolen valor case to be processed and forgotten. The judge hadn't finished destroying her yet. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories of quiet courage and hidden sacrifice, consider subscribing. The courtroom thought they knew who she was. They were about to be proven devastatingly wrong. 3 days earlier, Maya Carter had been sleeping in the doorway of a closed electronics store when Officer Martinez found her. It was 2:47 a.m. on a Saturday, and the November rain in Portland had been falling steadily for 6 hours. Maya was curled up in a sleeping bag that had seen better decades, a small duffel bag clutched against her chest like armor. "Ma'am, you can't sleep here," Martinez had said, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Store owner called it in. Says it's bad for business." Maya opened her eyes slowly, the way she'd been trained to wake up in hostile territory, alert but not threatening, ready but not aggressive. She sat up carefully, water dripping from the makeshift tarp she'd rigged above the doorway. "I'll move along," she said quietly. Her voice was hoarse from the cold and from not speaking to another human being in 4 days. "Just give me a minute to pack up." That's when Martinez's flashlight beam caught the edge of her jacket, a military field jacket, worn and faded, but unmistakably Army issue. And pinned to the chest, catching the light like tiny mirrors, were the medals. Martinez was a veteran himself. 6 years in the Marines, 2 deployments to Afghanistan. He knew what he was looking at, and something about it didn't sit right. A silver star, a bronze star with Valor, and was that a Purple Heart with multiple awards? On a homeless woman who looked like she weighed maybe 120 pounds soaking wet? "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification." Maya's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I don't have any." "What about military ID, DD-214, anything to verify these decorations?" Maya looked down at the medals pinned to her jacket. She'd worn them every day for 3 years, not out of pride, but because they were the only proof she had left of who she used to be. The only evidence that Maya Carter had ever existed as anything more than just another homeless veteran invisible to the world. "I don't have papers," she said simply. Martinez frowned. In his experience, real veterans carried their DD-214s like sacred texts. They could recite their service number, their MOS, their duty stations from memory. This woman sat in the rain wearing decorations that collectively represented the highest levels of military valor, and she had nothing to back them up. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." "For sleeping in a doorway?" "For possible stolen valor. It's a federal crime to wear military decorations you didn't earn." Maya stood slowly, water running off her jacket in rivulets. She shouldered her duffel bag and looked Martinez in the eye for the first time. Her gaze was steady, unflinching, and something in it made the young officer take a half-step backward without realizing it. "Officer," she said quietly, "I've earned every piece of metal on this jacket, but I understand you're just doing your job." She held out her hands for the handcuffs. Martinez cuffed her gently, professional but not cruel. As he led her to his patrol car, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with this picture. The woman moved like a soldier, ape. Precise, economical, aware of her surroundings, even in restraints. When he helped her into the back seat, she automatically scanned the interior of the vehicle, her eyes cataloging exits, potential weapons, tactical advantages. Nobody moved like that by accident. During the ride to the station, Martinez tried to make conversation. "Where'd you serve?" he asked, watching her in the rearview mirror. Maya stared out the window at the empty streets. "Can't talk about it." "What do you mean you can't talk about it?" "Classified." Martinez suppressed a snort. That was what they all said when they got caught. Classified, the magic word that was supposed to explain away any inconsistencies in their stories. "Ma'am, unless you were a Navy SEAL or something, there's no such thing as classified Army service." Maya's reflection met his eyes in the mirror. "No," she said quietly. "I suppose there isn't." She didn't speak again for the rest of the ride. At the station, Maya was processed like any other arrest. Fingerprints, mugshots, personal effects inventory. The booking sergeant, a woman named Collins who'd been doing this job for 15 years, handled Maya's medals with something approaching reverence. "These are beautiful," Collins said, examining the silver star under the fluorescent lights. "My grandfather had one of these from World War II. Never talked about how he earned it." Maya watched Collins handle the medal. "What was his name?" "Staff Sergeant Robert Collins, Pacific Theater." Maya nodded slowly. "The good ones never talk about it." Collins looked up sharply, studying Maya's face. There was something in the woman's tone, a weight that spoke of experience, of knowledge that couldn't be faked. "You really earned these?" Collins asked quietly. Maya's answer was barely audible. "I earned them." Collins finished the inventory in silence. When she was done, Maya was given a blanket and led to a holding cell. She sat on the narrow bench and stared at the concrete wall, her hands folded in her lap. In her jacket pocket, now sealed in an evidence bag, was a small piece of paper, a business card, worn soft from handling, with nothing but a phone number written in fading ink. The number belonged to a man Maya hadn't spoken to in 3 years, a man who might be the only person left alive who could verify her story. But calling that number would mean breaking cover. It would mean admitting who she really was, and Maya Carter had spent 3 years learning to be invisible for a reason. Some secrets were worth going to prison for. Judge William Harrison had been on the bench for 12 years, and he'd seen his share of stolen valor cases. They always followed the same pattern. Someone down on their luck, desperate for respect or benefits, would claim military service they'd never performed. Usually it was small stuff, an army cook claiming to be a ranger, a supply clerk saying he'd been in combat. But this case was different. This woman was claiming decorations that represented the absolute pinnacle of military valor. Harrison was a veteran himself, 4 years in the Navy during peacetime, mostly pushing papers on a destroyer. He'd never seen combat, never earned anything beyond a good conduct medal, but he understood what those decorations meant. The Silver Star was the 3rd highest military decoration for valor. The Bronze Star with Valor was awarded for heroic action in combat. And the Purple Heart? You only got that for being wounded or killed in action. For this slip of a woman to claim she'd earned all 3? It was insulting to every real veteran who'd bled for their country. The courtroom was nearly empty this Tuesday morning. A few court watchers, retirees with nothing better to do, a journalism student from Portland State fulfilling an assignment requirement. The defendant sat at the defense table next to Jerry Rollins, an overworked public defender who'd been assigned to the case 48 hours earlier. Rollins had tried to convince his client to take a plea deal. The evidence was circumstantial, No military records could be found for Maya Carter matching her description, no verification of service, no witnesses to corroborate her claims. But she also had no criminal history, and first-time stolen valor cases usually resulted in probation and community service. Maya had refused. She wouldn't explain why, wouldn't provide any information that might help her defense. She just sat in the county jail for 3 days, silent as a stone, waiting for this moment. Miss Carter, Judge Harrison continued, the prosecution has presented evidence that no military records exist under your name. The Department of Defense has no record of your service. The medals you were wearing appear to be commercially available replicas that can be purchased online for less than $50. In the prosecution section, Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Vance stood at her table, a stack of papers in front of her. She was thorough, professional, and absolutely convinced she was prosecuting a fraud. Your Honor, Vance said, the defendant has refused to provide any documentation of her supposed military service. She claims her service was classified, but that's a common excuse used by individuals attempting to explain away their inability to provide verification. The evidence clearly shows this is a case of stolen valor, and we ask that the court impose the maximum penalty to send a message that this behavior will not be tolerated. Judge Harrison nodded approvingly. He'd seen this song and dance before. Miss Carter, he said, before I pass sentence, is there anything you'd like to say? Any evidence you'd like to present? Any explanation for why you were wearing decorations you clearly never earned? Maya stood slowly. Jerry Rollins started to stand beside her. Ooh, wow. It was his job to speak for his client, your crew. But Maya put a gentle hand on his arm, stopping him. She looked directly at Judge Harrison for the first time since entering the courtroom. Her voice was clear, steady, and carried none of the desperation that usually marked defendants making last-ditch appeals. Your Honor, I served my country with distinction for 8 years. I earned every decoration I was wearing through actions I cannot describe in an open courtroom. I understand that you have no way to verify this, and I accept whatever sentence you deem appropriate. Judge Harrison's expression darkened. The audacity of this woman, maintaining her lies even in the face of certain conviction, was breathtaking. Miss Carter, your continued insistence on this fabricated story is insulting to every real veteran in this courtroom. I've served my country, and I know what real military bearing looks like. I know what real veterans act like when they're accused of fraud. They fight back. They provide evidence. They don't sit silently in jail for 3 days refusing to defend themselves. He picked up the medals again, holding them like they were contaminated. These decorations represent the highest ideals of military service. They are earned through blood, sacrifice, and courage under fire. For you to claim them as your own is not just fraud, it's a desecration of everything our military stands for. Maya's face remained impassive, but something flickered in her eyes. Not anger exactly, but recognition. The look of someone who had been judged before and found wanting, despite having given everything she had to give. Judge Harrison was just getting warmed up. The Silver Star is awarded for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States. Recipients have to demonstrate conspicuous bravery, often at the risk of their own lives. Do you really expect this court to believe that someone of your stature performed actions worthy of such recognition? In the gallery, a few spectators nodded in agreement. The woman at the defense table didn't look like a war hero. She looked like what she was, a homeless veteran who'd lost her way. And the Purple Heart, Harrison continued, is reserved for those wounded or killed in action. It represents blood spilled in service of our nation. Where are your scars, Miss Carter? Where's the evidence of the wounds that supposedly earned you this decoration? Maya's left hand moved almost imperceptibly toward her right shoulder, then stopped. Hidden beneath the orange jumpsuit was a scar where an IED fragment had torn through muscle and bone, missing her carotid artery by less than an inch. Hidden beneath her clothing were the marks left by 3 different combat tours, by explosions and firefights and operations that officially never happened. But she said nothing. Judge Harrison set the medals back down with deliberate care. Miss Carter, I find you guilty of fraudulent representation under the Stolen Valor Act. You are hereby sentenced to 6 months in federal prison, followed by 12 months of supervised probation. You will also pay restitution in the amount of $5,000 to the veterans organization of the court's choosing. He raised his gavel. Furthermore, I want it noted for the record that this court finds your behavior particularly egregious, given the sacred nature of the decorations you chose to desecrate. Real veterans fought and died for the right to wear those medals, and The courtroom doors exploded open. The sound echoed through the chamber like a gunshot, cutting Judge Harrison off mid-sentence. Every head turned toward the back of the room. The heavy oak doors, which were always opened and closed with quiet reverence in the dignity of the court, had been thrown wide with enough force to slam them against the wall. A man stood silhouetted in the doorway. He was tall, oarazo, easily 6'3" obrazo, and built like he could bench press a small car. His dress green uniform was so perfectly pressed, it looked like it had been carved from emeralds. The brass buttons and insignia caught the light and threw it back like signals. On his chest, ribbons covered nearly every available inch of fabric, a rainbow of colors that told the story of a career spent in the world's most dangerous places. But it was his collar that made everyone in the courtroom stop breathing. 4 stars, 4 silver stars that marked him as one of the most senior military officers in the United States Army. He stepped into the courtroom, and the very air seemed to change. This wasn't just military bearing away. This was command presence distilled into human form. When he walked, it wasn't just movement, it was a force of nature given direction and purpose. Judge Harrison's gavel froze halfway to the bench. Assistant District Attorney Vance's mouth fell open. Jerry Rollins looked like he'd seen a ghost. And Maya Carter, who hadn't shown emotion since the moment she was arrested, closed her eyes and took a shaky breath. The general walked down the center aisle of the courtroom with measured steps. His eyes never left Judge Harrison's face. When he reached the bar that separated the gallery from the court proper, he stopped. "Your Honor," he said, and his voice carried the weight of authority earned through decades of command. "I respectfully request permission to address this court." Judge Harrison's mouth worked soundlessly for several seconds. In 12 years on the bench, he'd never had a 4-star general walk into his courtroom. Hell, he'd never even seen a 4-star general except in photographs. That is, General, what is the nature of your business with this court? The general's gaze shifted to Maya for the first time since entering the room. She was looking at him now, and for the first time since her arrest, tears were visible in her eyes. "Your Honor, my business concerns the defendant and the gross miscarriage of justice I walked in to witness." Judge Harrison found his voice, along with his judicial authority. "General, I appreciate your service to our nation, but this is a court of law. I can't allow—" "Colonel Maya Carter," the general said, his voice cutting through Harrison's words like a blade through silk. "Call sign, Ghost, Delta Force, 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment, 8 years of active service, 3 combat deployments, 17 classified operations." The courtroom went dead silent. Silver Star earned in Kandahar Province, Afghanistan, while leading a 12-hour rescue operation behind enemy lines. Bronze Star with Valor earned in Syria during a hostage rescue that saved 14 American contractors. Purple Heart with 3 oak leaf clusters for wounds received during operations I cannot describe in this forum. Judge Harrison's face had gone white as paper. "General," he said weakly, "surely there's been some mistake. The defendant, the records show no service under that name." The general reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a leather folder. He opened it and held it up for the court to see. "Presidential Unit Citation," he said simply. "Signed by the Commander-in-Chief. Colonel Carter's unit was awarded this decoration for actions that will remain classified for the next 30 years. I was her commanding officer for 6 of those 8 years. I personally recommended her for every decoration she wears." He closed the folder and put it back in his pocket. "Your Honor, the woman you just sentenced to federal prison is one of the most decorated special operations soldiers in the history of the United States Army. She has bled for her country, killed for her country, and sacrificed everything a Purua, including her identity, o Puru, for her country." Judge Harrison's gavel slipped from nerveless fingers and clattered to the floor. "But the records," he whispered, "are classified under a national security directive that I signed personally. Colonel Carter's service is so highly classified that even acknowledging it exists requires congressional oversight. The Maya Carter you've been prosecuting is a cover identity. Her real name, her real service record, her real life, oui. All of it has been sealed to protect ongoing operations and the lives of assets still in the field." The general stepped closer to the bench. "Your Honor, you have just convicted a Medal of Honor candidate Yes, Medal of Honor AQ, for wearing decorations she earned in blood while you sat safely behind this bench. And you did it while insulting her courage, questioning her service, and suggesting that someone of her stature couldn't possibly be a real soldier." Judge Harrison looked like he might be sick. "She could have defended herself at any time," the general continued, "could have broken her cover, blown active operations, and endangered lives to prove her innocence. But she chose to go to prison rather than betray her oath. That, Your Honor, is what real honor looks like." Behind Maya, Jerry Rollins was frantically scribbling notes, his mind racing to process what was happening. In the prosecution section, Rebecca Vance was staring at her case file, like it might explain how she'd just attempted to imprison a legitimate war hero. "General," Judge Harrison said, his voice barely audible, "if what you're saying is true, what do I? You dismiss all charges immediately. You apologize to Colonel Carter for the treatment she's received. And then you pray to God that this never leaves this courtroom, because if it does, the media circus will compromise operations that have taken years to develop." Judge Harrison nodded rapidly, reaching for his gavel with shaking hands. "All charges against the defendant are hereby dismissed," he said quickly. "The court apologizes for the—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Maya Carter stood at the defense table, tears streaming down her face as the general approached her. When he reached her, he came to attention and rendered a perfect military salute. "Welcome home, Colonel," he said quietly. Maya returned the salute with trembling hands, and in that moment, in a small courthouse in Portland, Oregon, a ghost became human again. This was just the beginning of Maya's story. In Part 2, we'll see how she begins to rebuild her life after years in the shadows, the challenges of reintegrating into a world that thought she was dead, and the secrets that forced her into hiding in the first place. If you've ever known someone who sacrificed everything for a truth they couldn't speak, someone who carried impossible weight with quiet dignity, someone who chose honor over comfort even when it cost them everything, adios, share their story in the comments below. And if this story touched you, if it reminded you that heroism often looks like endurance rather than glory, then subscribe, because these are the stories that need to be told. The quiet ones, the complicated ones, the ones about people who keep going even when no one's watching, even when no one believes them, even when the whole world has forgotten they exist. The courtroom remained frozen in stunned silence for nearly 30 seconds after the general's final words. Judge Harrison sat behind his bench like a man who'd just watched his entire worldview collapse. Rebecca Vance stared at her case files as if they might spontaneously combust. Even the bailiff, a 20-year veteran of courtroom drama, stood motionless by the side door. Maya Carter, Iutao, Colonel Maya Carter Abao, wiped her tears with the back of her hand and straightened to attention. 3 years of living invisible, of being nobody, of accepting the world's judgment that she was worthless, fell away like shed skin. The change was visible. Her shoulders squared, her spine aligned. The hollow look in her eyes was replaced by something that had been buried, but never killed. Command, presence. "Sir," she said to the general, her voice steady now, professional, "I respectfully request permission to change out of this jumpsuit. It's not appropriate attire for addressing a superior officer." General Marcus Webb, off Tuve, though only a handful of people in the courtroom would ever know his name. Almost smiled. "Permission granted, Colonel. Though under the circumstances, I think we can dispense with protocol." Judge Harrison found his voice, though it came out as a croak. "General, what happens now? What do I do with, how do I handle?" Webb turned his attention back to the judge, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Your Honor, what happens now is that you ensure this incident never appears in any official record. The arrest report will be sealed. The court transcript will be classified. Anyone who was present in this courtroom today just witnessed events that fall under the Espionage Act." The journalism student in the gallery looked up from her notebook, pen frozen halfway to the page. The court reporter's fingers had stopped moving entirely. Webb continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Colonel Carter's cover identity has been maintained for 3 years as part of an ongoing national security operation. Today's events have compromised that cover, which means we now have a situation that requires cleanup." Maya stepped forward. "Sir, with respect, the operational security concern is minimal. My cover was already blown when I was arrested wearing my decorations. At this point, damage control is more important than maintaining the fiction." Webb studied her face. "Are you requesting extraction, Colonel?" Maya was quiet for a long moment. Extraction meant safety. It meant being pulled back into the classified world where her identity was known, where her service was valued, where she would never again have to sleep in doorways or scrounge for food. It meant going home to a community that understood what she'd sacrificed. But it also meant disappearing again. It meant becoming a ghost once more, existing in the shadows between the official world and the real one. "No, sir," she said finally. "I'm requesting permission to stay in place with modifications." Webb raised an eyebrow. "Explain." Maya glanced around the courtroom. At Judge Harrison, at Jerry Rollins, still scribbling notes, at the handful of spectators who'd just witnessed something that would change their understanding of the world forever. "Sir, there are veterans in this city who need help. Real help, not just from the system, but from someone who understands what they're going through. My cover may be blown, but Maya Carter still exists. She's still a veteran who fell through the cracks. She can still do good here." Webb was quiet for several seconds, processing. "You want to stay? After 3 years of homelessness? After being arrested and put on trial for wearing your own medals?" "I want to serve, sir, in whatever capacity that service is needed." Judge Harrison cleared his throat nervously. "Excuse me, but what about the trial? The charges? The sentence I just imposed?" Webb turned to him with an expression that could have melted steel. "Your Honor, let me be very clear about what happened here today. You convicted a decorated special operations officer for wearing medals she earned through actions that saved American lives. You questioned her courage, insulted her service, and suggested she wasn't worthy of the honors she carries." Harrison shrank back in his chair. "However," Webb continued, "you were operating with incomplete information through no fault of your own. The classification level of Colonel Carter's service made verification impossible through normal channels. The question now is how we move forward." Maya stepped in. "Your Honor, I hold no ill will toward this court. You were doing your job based on the evidence available to you. I understand the position you were put in, and I respect the principles you were trying to uphold." Judge Harrison stared at her in disbelief. "You respect? But I was about to send you to prison for 6 months. You were protecting the integrity of military honors, sir. That's not something I can fault you for." Jerry Rollins finally spoke up, his voice shaking slightly. "Your Honor, in light of this new information, I move for complete dismissal of all charges and expungement of my client's arrest record." "Granted," Harrison said immediately. "Motion granted. All charges dismissed, record sealed and expunged." He paused, then looked directly at Maya. "Colonel Carter, I owe you an apology, not just as a judge, but as a fellow veteran. What I said about questioning whether you could have earned those decorations, It was inappropriate and wrong. Maya nodded once. Apology accepted, Your Honor. Webb stepped forward again. Your Honor, I'm going to need your assurance that the events of today remain sealed. What you've witnessed here falls under multiple classification protocols. Of course, General. Absolutely. The court reporter will mark today's transcript as classified at the highest level. Good. Webb turned to the gallery. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just been present for events that are classified above top secret. You will not discuss what you've seen here with anyone. You will not post about it on social media. You will not write about it, blog about it, or mention it in casual conversation. Doing so would constitute a federal crime punishable by up to 20 years in federal prison. The journalism student raised her hand tentatively. Sir, what about freedom of the press? First Amendment rights? Webb's expression didn't change. Miss, the First Amendment doesn't extend to classified military operations. You're free to write about the stolen Valor case that was dismissed due to new evidence. You're not free to write about anything else that happened in this room. He gestured toward the bailiff. Deputy Williams will need to collect any notes, recordings, or photographs taken during today's proceedings. They'll be classified and secured. The journalism student reluctantly handed over her notebook. One of the court watchers surrendered his phone after deleting what appeared to be a video recording. Webb waited until all materials were collected, then addressed the room one final time. What happened here today was the correction of an injustice. A decorated veteran was wrongfully accused due to the classified nature of her service. The charges were dismissed when proper verification was provided. That's the only version of events that officially occurred. Judge Harrison nodded rapidly. Understood, General. Completely understood. Webb turned back to Maya. Colonel, you have 48 hours to decide on your next move. If you're serious about staying in place, we'll need to discuss terms and conditions. There are protocols for this kind of transition. I understand, sir. Webb came to attention and saluted Maya one more time. She returned the salute crisply. Semper Fi, Colonel. Semper Fi, sir. Webb turned and walked out of the courtroom with the same commanding presence he'd brought in. The heavy doors closed behind him with a soft thud, and suddenly the chamber felt normal again, like the last 10 minutes had been a collective hallucination. Judge Harrison sat back in his chair, looking exhausted. Court is adjourned, he said weakly, permanently adjourned. Maya spent her first night of freedom in 48 hours at a veterans' transitional housing facility downtown. It wasn't much aoshu. A small room with a single bed, a shared bathroom down the hall, and institutional lighting that never quite felt warm. But it was clean, safe, and legal. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed, still wearing the civilian clothes that Jerry Rollins had brought her to replace the orange jumpsuit. Jeans, a plain gray sweater, and boots that had seen better years but still held together. Her medals lay on the small table beside her, no longer evidence in a criminal case, but simply what they had always been, pieces of metal that represented moments when she'd been required to be more than human. There was a soft knock at her door. Maya opened it to find a woman in her 50s wearing a VA badge and carrying a clipboard. Colonel Carter, I'm Linda Vasquez, Veteran Services Coordinator. General Webb asked me to check in with you. Maya stepped aside to let her in. Vasquez entered and immediately noticed the medals on the table. She didn't stare, didn't ask questions, just acknowledged them with a small nod of recognition. How are you feeling? Vasquez asked, settling into the room's only chair. Maya sat back down on the bed. Confused, mostly. 3 years ago, I was someone. I had an identity, a mission, a purpose. Then I became no one. And now you're somewhere in between. Exactly. Maya looked out the small window at the city lights beyond. When you're deep cover for long enough, you start to forget which identity is real. Maya Carter was supposed to be a temporary fiction, but I've been her longer than I was Colonel anybody. Vasquez made a note on her clipboard. General Webb said you want to stay in Portland, work with local veterans. I do. There are people here who fell through the same cracks I did. The system failed them the same way it failed me, but they don't have a 4-star general who's going to walk into a courtroom to save them. And you think you can help them because you've been where they are. Maya nodded. I know what it's like to be invisible, to have people look right through you, to be dismissed as just another homeless vet with problems. But I also know what it's like to fight back from that place, to rebuild when everything has been stripped away. Vasquez was quiet for a moment, studying Maya's face. Can I ask you something, off the record? Go ahead. Why did you stay silent during the trial? You could have called General Webb at any time. You could have blown your cover to save yourself. Why didn't you? Maya was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but certain. Because once you break operational security, you can't unbreak it. My cover protected more than just me. There were assets in the field, operations in progress, people whose lives depended on Maya Carter remaining a fiction. I couldn't sacrifice their safety for my freedom. Even if it meant going to prison for 6 months? Even if it meant going to prison forever. Vasquez set down her clipboard. Colonel, I've been working with veterans for 23 years. I've seen heroes and cowards, saints and criminals, everything in between. But I've never met anyone who would choose prison over breaking their oath. Maya looked at her. Then you haven't been working with the right veterans. Vasquez smiled. Maybe not, but I'm working with one now. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. General Webb left instructions for me to help you with whatever transition you choose. If you want to go back into the classified world, he can arrange extraction within 24 hours. If you want to start over somewhere new with a clean identity, he can make that happen too. And if I want to stay here, stay Maya Carter but do it openly, then we figure out how to make that work. Vasquez opened the door. Get some sleep, Colonel. Tomorrow we start planning your next mission. After she left, Maya lay back on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in 3 years, she felt something approaching hope. Not the desperate hope of someone with no options, but the quiet confidence of someone who had found their purpose. Tomorrow, she would start the process of becoming herself again, not the classified ghost who had operated in shadows, and not the invisible homeless woman who had survived on the streets, but something new. Someone who could bridge the gap between the military world that had shaped her and the civilian world that had rejected her. Someone who could help other veterans make that same journey. Maya's meeting with General Webb took place 2 days later in a nondescript office building downtown. The sign on the door read, Northwest Regional Consulting, but Maya knew a front operation when she saw one. The receptionist was too alert, the security too subtle, and the magazines in the waiting area were all precisely 3 months old. Webb was waiting for her in a conference room that had been swept for listening devices twice that morning. He was in civilian clothes now, akuho, khakis and a polo shirt that made him look like any other middle-aged businessman. But he still carried himself like he could order tanks to roll at a moment's notice. Colonel, he said, standing when she entered, you look better. Maya had traded the donated clothes for a simple business suit that Vasquez had helped her acquire. Her hair was neat, her posture military straight, and for the first time in 3 years she looked like the officer she'd always been. Thank you, sir. I feel better. They sat across from each other at a polished conference table. Webb opened a file folder and spread several documents in front of him. I've given considerable thought to your request to remain in place, he said. Normally, when a cover identity is blown this completely, we extract immediately. But your situation is unique. How so, sir? Maya Carter was never supposed to be a long-term identity. She was supposed to be a temporary bridge while we relocated you after Operation Crosswind went sideways. But when you disappeared into the homeless population instead of making contact, she became something else entirely. Webb pulled out a photograph. Oh, you. Maya sleeping in a doorway, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. We've been tracking you for 3 years, Colonel. Not closely, but enough to know you were alive and not compromised. We assumed you were maintaining operational security by staying dark. Maya stared at the photograph. You knew where I was. We knew approximately where you were. We monitored police reports, hospital admissions, shelter logs. We knew Maya Carter was arrested several times for minor infractions. We knew she was homeless, struggling. But we also knew she never tried to contact foreign intelligence services or sell classified information. You were watching me suffer and did nothing? Webb's expression didn't change. We were respecting your operational choice to remain dark. You're not the first operator to go to ground after a blown mission, Colonel. Sometimes that's the safest option for everyone involved. Maya felt anger rising in her chest, hot and familiar. Sir, I was sleeping in Nameta doorways, eating out of dumpsters. I was arrested and put on trial for wearing my own medals, and you did nothing. We intervened the moment your trial became public record. Before that, Maya Carter was just another homeless veteran in a city full of them. There was no reason to believe you needed extraction. No reason to believe. Maya stopped herself, took a breath, and forced her voice back to professional levels. Sir, with respect, did it occur to anyone that I might have been waiting for extraction? That I might have thought I'd been abandoned? For the first time since she'd known him, Webb looked uncomfortable. Colonel, operational security required leaving me to rot on the streets for 3 years because it was more convenient than checking if I needed help. Webb was quiet for several seconds. Then he nodded slowly. You're right. We made assumptions about your situation that were incorrect. We prioritized operational security over personnel welfare, and that was a failure of leadership on my part. Maya blinked. In 8 years of serving under Webb, she'd never heard him admit to being wrong about anything. Sir? Colonel, you've been through hell because we failed to extract you when Operation Crosswind collapsed. You've spent 3 years believing you'd been abandoned by the people you served. And when you were finally in real danger, we only intervened because the situation became public. That's not how we're supposed to treat our people. Webb closed the file folder and leaned back in his chair. Which brings me to your request to stay in place. Normally, I'd deny it immediately. Too much exposure, too much risk, too many variables we can't control. But given what we put you through, I think we owe you the choice. What does that mean practically? Webb reopened the folder and pulled out a new set of documents. It means Maya Carter becomes an official cover identity with full backing. We'll create a complete history for her, all birth certificate, social security records, employment history, everything she needs to exist legitimately in the civilian world. He slid a paper across the table. It also means a substantial settlement from the Department of Defense for the 3 years you spent homeless due to our operational failures, enough to live comfortably while you figure out what comes next. Maya looked at the figure written on the paper and felt her breath catch. It was more money than she'd ever seen in one place. There are conditions, Webb continued. You'll have periodic check-ins with a handler. You'll maintain operational security about your real service history. And if we ever need you for a time-sensitive operation, you'll be available. And if I want to work with veterans? Then you work with veterans. As Maya Carter, former Army logistics specialist who understands the system and wants to help others navigate it. Webb paused. Just remember, Colonel Abradozoao, your real service record stays classified forever. You'll be helping people as someone who officially never did the things that qualify you to help them. Maya considered this. I can live with that. Webb stood and extended his hand. Welcome to your new life, Maya Carter. Try not to get arrested again. Maya shook his hand and smiled for the first time in the conversation. I'll do my best, sir. As she left the building, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. Possibility. The future was no longer something that happened to her, but something she could shape. She had resources now, legitimacy, and most importantly, a mission that mattered. Her first stop was the Veterans Transitional Housing Facility where she'd spent the last few nights. She found the night manager, a gruff former Marine named Davidson, who'd been suspicious of her story until word filtered down about what had happened in the courthouse. Davidson, she said, I want to talk to you about expanding the programs here. He looked up from his paperwork. What kind of programs? Job training, housing assistance, legal advocacy, but also the kind of support that doesn't show up in government manuals. Someone to talk to when the nightmares get bad. Someone who understands what it's like to come back from places that officially don't exist. Davidson studied her face. That's going to cost money we don't have, Maya smiled. Let me worry about the money. The Carter Veterans Resource Center occupied a converted warehouse in southeast Portland. It wasn't fancy hours with exposed brick walls, concrete floors, and industrial lighting, but it was warm, welcoming, and most importantly, It worked. Maya stood in the main common area, watching a group of veterans work through a job skills workshop. In one corner, a former Marine was learning basic computer skills. Near the windows, two Army veterans were practicing interview techniques. At a table in the center, a Navy corpsman was working with a volunteer to fill out housing assistance paperwork. All of them were people who had fallen through the cracks. All of them were getting help they couldn't find anywhere else, and all of them were being served by a woman who officially had no more credentials than any other veteran with a logistics background. "Maya?" She turned to find Linda Vasquez approaching with a clipboard in hand and a satisfied expression on her face. "The monthly numbers are in," Vasquez said. 67 veterans served this month, 41 connected with permanent housing, 23 found employment, and 0 aulappa, that's 0 apiro, arrests for minor infractions among our regulars. Maya nodded, pleased but not surprised. "What about the waiting list?" "Still 3 weeks out. We're going to need to expand again if the demand keeps growing." Maya looked around the busy space. 6 months ago, this had been an empty warehouse and a crazy idea. Now it was a functioning community center that was making a real difference in people's lives. "Maya Carter?" Both women turned to see a young man in his 20s approaching. He was clean-shaven, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt, but Maya could see the signs, "Oof," the way he held his shoulders, the alert way he scanned the room, the particular kind of careful control that marked recent combat veterans. "I'm Maya. How can I help you?" "Ma'am, my name is Tom Bradley. I was Army infantry. Did 3 tours in Afghanistan. I've been struggling since I got back. Lost my job, lost my apartment, been sleeping in my car for 2 weeks. Maya gestured toward a quiet corner with comfortable chairs. "Let's sit down and talk." As they walked across the room, Tom continued his story. "I heard about this place from a guy at the VA. He said you might be able to help. Said you understood what it was like to fall through the cracks." They settled into chairs facing each other. Maya leaned forward slightly, her posture open and attentive. "Tom, tell me about the last 6 months. What happened?" For the next hour, Maya listened to a story she'd heard dozens of times since opening the center. A veteran who'd served with honor, come home to a system that didn't understand him, and slowly lost everything while trying to navigate bureaucracies that seemed designed to fail him. But she also heard something else. Resilience, determination, and the particular kind of strength that came from surviving things most people couldn't imagine. "Tom," she said when he finished, "you're not broken, you're not a failure. You're a veteran who served his country with honor and came home to a system that wasn't prepared to help you transition. That's not your fault." "It feels like my fault." "I know it does. I felt the same way." Maya paused, choosing her words carefully. "I spent time on the streets too. More time than I care to remember, and I learned something during those months. Ubudu, falling down doesn't make you weak. Staying down does." Tom looked up at her. "How do I get back up?" Maya stood and walked to a filing cabinet, returning with a folder full of forms and information sheets. "We start with the basics. Emergency housing voucher to get you out of your car tonight. Tomorrow, we work on permanent housing options. Next week, we start job placement assistance. And through all of it, you've got people here who understand what you're going through because we've been there ourselves." She handed him the folder. "But Tom, I need you to understand something. This isn't charity. This isn't us feeling sorry for you. This is veterans taking care of veterans, because that's what we do. You served with honor, and that means something here." Tom's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, ma'am. Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you're back on your feet and helping the next guy who walks through those doors." As Tom left to work with a case manager on his emergency housing application, Maya felt the familiar satisfaction of a mission accomplished. Not the adrenaline rush of a successful operation, but the deeper contentment that came from knowing your work mattered. Linda Vasquez approached again, this time with a newspaper in her hand. "Maya, you need to see this." The headline read, "Local Veterans Center wins State Recognition Award." Below, it was a photograph of Maya standing in front of the center, smiling and holding a plaque. Maya read the article quickly. It detailed the center's work, quoted several veterans who'd been helped, and described Maya Carter as a former Army logistics specialist who turned her own struggles with homelessness into a mission to help other veterans. "It's good coverage," Vasquez said. "This should help with fundraising and political support." Maya nodded, but something in the article nagged at her. The description of her background, while technically accurate, felt hollow. Maya Carter, logistics specialist, sounded like someone who might understand veterans' bureaucratic struggles. She didn't sound like someone who understood what it meant to take fire, to make life and death decisions, to carry the weight of classified operations. But that was the price of her new life. She could help people, could make a real difference, could serve in a way that mattered. She just had to do it as someone she'd never really been. "Maya?" Vasquez was looking at her with concern. "Everything okay?" Maya folded the newspaper and smiled. "Everything's fine. Just thinking about how far we've come." "And where we're going next?" Maya looked around the busy center, at veterans getting help they needed, at volunteers who understood their struggles, at a community that was slowly healing itself one person at a time. "Next, we expand. More programs, more outreach, more veterans brought back from the edges. That's the mission now." As the day wound down and the center grew quieter, Maya stood at the windows, looking out at the Portland skyline. Somewhere out there were veterans who were struggling tonight, people who felt invisible and forgotten, men and women who'd served with honor and come home to a world that didn't understand their sacrifices. Tomorrow, some of them would find their way to her door, and when they did, they'd be met by someone who understood exactly what they were going through, even if she could never tell them why. It wasn't the life she'd planned, it wasn't the recognition she'd earned, but it was service, and service had always been enough. Maya Carter, former Army logistics specialist, smiled and headed home to prepare for another day of helping veterans find their way back from the darkness. Colonel Maya Carter, callsign Ghost, would remain a classified memory forever. But the work would continue. If you want to see how Maya's story concludes, make sure you're subscribed and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more inspiring military stories like this one. If you've ever known someone who served in silence, someone who sacrificed everything for truths they couldn't speak, or someone who turned their darkest moments into a mission to help others, share their story in the comments below. These quiet heroes walk among us every day, often unrecognized and unacknowledged. Maya Carter's story reminds us that sometimes the greatest courage isn't displayed on a battlefield it's shown in the daily choice to keep going when no one's watching, to serve others when you yourself have been forgotten, and to rebuild not just your own life, but the lives of those who need it most. The veterans who find help at centers like Maya's don't just receive services or brew. They find community, understanding, and proof that their service mattered. They discover that falling down doesn't define you. What defines you is getting back up and helping others do the same. In the comments, tell us where you're watching from and share the name of a veteran who made a difference in your life. Let's honor them together. And if you want to hear more stories like this, Eido. Stories of quiet courage, hidden sacrifice, and the power of service that continues long after the uniform comes off. OP. Please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These true tales keep the courage alive for generations to come. Thank you for watching, and remember, no veteran fights alone. The morning rain drummed against the windows of the Carter Veterans Resource Center as Maya unlocked the front doors at 6 a.m. She'd been coming in early for 2 years now, not because she had to, but because she'd learned that some of the veterans who needed help most were the ones who showed up before the world was awake Adi Tauro. The ones who couldn't sleep, who walked the streets at night, who felt safer in empty spaces than crowded ones. Today was different, though. Today marked the second anniversary of the center's opening, and Maya had agreed to something she'd avoided for months, a television interview. The local news crew was already setting up their equipment in the main common area. Bright lights on stands, cameras on tripods, and a reporter named Jennifer Walsh who'd been covering veteran issues for Channel 8 for the past 5 years. Walsh understood the community well enough to know that most of the real stories never made it onto the evening news. "Ms. Carter," Walsh said, approaching Maya with a warm smile and a steaming coffee cup. "Thank you for agreeing to this. I know you usually prefer to stay out of the spotlight." Maya accepted the coffee gratefully. The center's work speaks for itself. I'm just here to make sure the story gets told accurately. Walsh gestured toward the cameras. We're ready whenever you are. I thought we'd start with some general questions about the center's mission, then maybe walk through some of the programs, talk about the impact you've had on the community. Maya nodded, but something in her expression made Walsh pause. Is everything all right? You seem nervous? Maya took a sip of coffee and looked around the space she'd helped create. 2 years ago, this had been an empty warehouse. Now it was a thriving community center with programs that had been replicated in 3 other cities. Veterans from across the Pacific Northwest came here not just for services, but for something harder to define, AOQ, understanding, community, proof that they weren't alone. I'm not nervous about the interview, Maya said finally. I'm nervous about the attention it might bring. Walsh raised an eyebrow. Attention is usually good for nonprofits, helps with funding, volunteer recruitment, political support. Usually, yes. Maya paused. But sometimes attention brings scrutiny, and scrutiny can be complicated. Before Walsh could ask what she meant, the front doors opened and Tom Bradley walked in. It had been 18 months since Maya first met him when he was sleeping in his car, desperate and broken. Now he was the center's volunteer coordinator, clean-shaven and confident, wearing a staff polo shirt with Tom embroidered over the pocket. Morning, Maya, he said, then noticed the cameras. Oh, right, big day today. Tom's one of our success stories, Maya explained to Walsh. Came to us homeless and unemployed. Now he's helping run our job placement program. Walsh's eyes lit up. Could we interview him too? Get his perspective on how the center changed his life? Maya looked at Tom, who nodded enthusiastically. I'd be honored to talk about what this place means. As the news crew finished their setup, more veterans began arriving for the day's programs. Maya watched them file in ROO. Some confident and thriving, others still struggling, but no longer struggling alone. Each one represented a life that had been redirected, a trajectory that had been changed from despair toward hope. All right, Walsh said, taking her position in front of the cameras. Let's start with some background. Maya, tell us about yourself. What led you to open the Carter Veterans Resource Center? Maya settled into the chair across from Walsh, keeping her posture relaxed but alert. This was always the tricky part. Telling enough of the truth to be credible without revealing anything that could compromise operational security. I'm a veteran myself, she began. Served 8 years in the Army, mostly in logistics and support roles. When I got out, I struggled with the transition back to civilian life. I experienced homelessness, unemployment, the feeling that the system I'd served didn't understand what I needed to rebuild my life. Walsh nodded sympathetically. That's unfortunately common among veterans. What made you decide to turn that experience into something positive? Maya chose her words carefully. I realized that my struggles weren't unique. There were thousands of veterans in this region alone who were falling through the same cracks I'd fallen through. The existing support systems were good, but they weren't designed for people like us, a few. People who'd served in roles that didn't fit neat categories, people whose service experiences were complicated. What do you mean by complicated? Veterans come home carrying different kinds of weight, Maya said. Some carry the visible wounds, oju, physical injuries that everyone can see and understand. Others carry invisible wounds, os, PTSD, traumatic brain injury, moral injury from experiences that are hard to explain to people who weren't there. And some carry the weight of service that can't be talked about at all. Walsh leaned forward. You mean classified operations? Maya paused just long enough to let the weight of the question settle. I mean, service that doesn't translate easily into civilian terms. When someone asks what you did in the military and you can't give them an answer that makes sense in the regular world, it's isolating. It makes you feel like your service didn't matter, or that you don't matter. She gestured around the room. Here, we understand that every veteran's service matters, regardless of whether they can talk about it publicly. We understand that the skills that made you effective in the military, OU, loyalty, integrity, the ability to operate under stress, OISPRU, are exactly the skills that can help you rebuild your civilian life. Can you give us some specific examples of how the center has helped people? Maya looked over at Tom, who was organizing files at a nearby desk. Tom came to us 18 months ago. He was an infantry soldier who'd done 3 combat deployments to Afghanistan. Came home to a civilian world that didn't know what to do with someone who'd spent years making life and death decisions under fire. He lost his job, his apartment, ended up living in his car. Tom looked up and joined the conversation. I thought I was broken, he said. I couldn't hold down a job because I couldn't relate to my coworkers, couldn't maintain relationships because I couldn't explain what I'd been through. I was angry all the time, but I couldn't tell anyone why. What changed? Walsh asked. Tom glanced at Maya. Maya helped me understand that I wasn't broken. I was just carrying weight I hadn't learned how to set down. She connected me with housing, helped me find work, but more than that, she helped me find community. People who understood that my combat experience wasn't something to be ashamed of or hidden. It was something that made me valuable. Walsh turned back to Maya. How do you help veterans process experiences they can't talk about publicly? Maya was quiet for a moment, considering how to answer without revealing too much about her own background. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything, and it helps me bring you more inspiring military stories like this one. We don't ask veterans to violate any oaths or security clearances, she said finally. But we do help them understand that their silence doesn't make their service less valuable. Sometimes the most important operations, the most critical missions, are the ones that never make it into history books. That doesn't mean they didn't happen, and it doesn't mean they didn't matter. She looked directly into the camera. If you're a veteran watching this, and you're carrying weight you can't talk about, I want you to know that you're not alone. Your service mattered. Your sacrifices were real. And there are people here who understand that without needing explanations. Walsh nodded, clearly moved by Maya's words. What's next for the center? What are your plans for expansion? We're opening our 4th satellite location next month, Maya said. We're also launching a peer mentorship program where veterans who've successfully transitioned help guide others through the process. And we're working with the VA to create a fast-track system for veterans whose service records are incomplete or classified. Incomplete service records? Maya chose her words very carefully. Sometimes military service records are classified for national security reasons. Sometimes they're incomplete due to administrative errors or the classified nature of certain operations. These veterans often have the hardest time accessing benefits because they can't provide documentation of service that officially doesn't exist. We're working to create pathways for them to get the help they've earned. After the interview wrapped up, the news crew packed their equipment and left. Maya stood in the quiet common area, watching through the windows as the morning rain continued to fall. You okay? Tom asked, approaching with 2 fresh cups of coffee. Maya accepted the coffee and sat down in one of the comfortable chairs that had been donated by a local furniture store. I'm fine, just thinking about unintended consequences. What kind of consequences? Maya sipped her coffee and considered how much to share. Tom was one of the few people at the center who'd figured out that there was more to Maya's background than logistics and supply chains. He'd never asked directly, but sometimes she caught him watching her with the particular kind of recognition that one combat veteran showed another. Tom, what do you know about my military service? Tom raised an eyebrow. Officially? Army Logistics Specialist, 8 years active duty, honorable discharge. Unofficially? He shrugged. You move like someone who's been in combat. You notice things civilians don't notice. You understand operational security in ways that supply clerks don't usually understand. And sometimes when we're working with veterans who've seen heavy action, they respond to you differently. Like they recognize something. Maya nodded slowly. What if I told you that everything in my official service record was a cover story designed to protect classified operations? Tom was quiet for a long moment. I'd say that would explain a lot, and I'd say it would make what you've built here even more impressive. Why? Because you could have disappeared back into whatever world you came from. You could have taken your real credentials and your real experience and gone back to work that officially matters. Instead, you stayed here to help people like me. using skills you can never acknowledge to solve problems you're not supposed to understand. Maya felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. It gets lonely sometimes, being the only one who knows the real story. Tom sat down across from her. Maya, I don't need to know what you really did or where you really served, but I want you to know that whatever it was, it prepared you to save my life and the lives of dozens of other veterans who've come through these doors. That matters more than any official recognition ever could. Before Maya could respond, the front doors opened and Linda Vasquez entered, shaking rain off her umbrella and carrying a manila envelope. Maya, I've got news, she said, approaching their table. Good news and potentially complicated news. Hit me with the complicated news first, Maya said. Vasquez opened the envelope and pulled out an official-looking letter. The Department of Veterans Affairs wants to recognize the Carter Center as a model program. They're proposing to fund similar centers in 20 major cities across the country. Full federal backing, substantial budget, national recognition. Maya felt her stomach drop. And the good news? That was the good news. The complicated part is that they want to do a comprehensive background check on you as part of the approval process. Full security clearance investigation, financial history, service record verification, the works. Tom looked between Maya and Vasquez. Is that a problem? Maya stood and walked to the windows, staring out at the rain-soaked streets. A security clearance investigation would mean questions she couldn't answer, records that didn't exist, and attention from people who might recognize what they were really looking at. It's complicated, she said finally. Vasquez joined her at the window. Maya, is there something I should know? Something that might affect the center's funding? Maya was quiet for a long time. Finally, she turned to face both Tom and Vasquez. What if I told you that accepting federal recognition might compromise the security of ongoing military operations? What if I told you that my background check would require congressional oversight and might endanger people who are currently in the field? Vasquez stared at her. Maya, what exactly did you do in the Army? I can't tell you that. Ever. But I can tell you that there are reasons why Maya. Carter's service record is limited to logistics and supply chains, and those reasons have nothing to do with being ashamed of my service. Tom nodded slowly. So what do we do? Turn down the funding. Maya looked around the center chapeau at the programs that were working, at the veterans who were being helped, at the community that had been built from nothing. We adapt, she said. We find a way to grow without federal oversight. We maintain our independence and our ability to help veterans who fall between the cracks of official systems. That means turning down millions of dollars in funding, Vasquez pointed out. It means staying true to our mission. Sometimes the most important work is the work that can't be officially recognized. That evening, Maya sat alone in her apartment, a modest 2-bedroom unit 6 blocks from the center. She'd furnished it simply but comfortably, with bookshelves full of military history and leadership texts, a few carefully chosen pieces of art, and a small desk where she did administrative work for the center. On the desk was a secure phone that hadn't rung in 6 months. It was her direct line to General Webb, to be used only in emergencies or if she ever needed extraction. Tonight, for the first time since moving to Portland, Maya picked up the phone and dialed. Webb answered on the second ring. Colonel Carter, I was wondering when you'd call. Sir, I assume you're aware of the federal recognition proposal. I am. I'm also aware that you haven't returned the paperwork. Maya leaned back in her chair. Sir, accepting federal oversight would compromise operational security, but turning it down might limit our ability to help veterans who need it most. What's your assessment, Colonel? Maya was quiet for a moment. Sir, the work we're doing here matters. We're reaching veterans that official programs can't reach, solving problems that bureaucratic systems can't solve. But we're doing it because we operate in the spaces between official recognition and real need. And federal oversight would eliminate those spaces. Yes, sir. Maya Carter, logistics specialist, can help veterans navigate bureaucracy. But she can't understand the specific needs of operators transitioning out of classified work. She can't recognize the signs of moral injury from missions that officially never happened. She can't provide the kind of support that really matters because officially, she's never been where these veterans have been. Webb was quiet for several seconds. Colonel, what do you need from me? Permission to decline the federal recognition and continue operating independently. Assurance that private funding sources won't be subject to the same level of scrutiny. And maybe some unofficial support for veterans who need help that can't be provided through official channels. Consider it done. Anything else? Maya hesitated. Sir, there are other veterans like me out there. People who've fallen through the cracks because their service can't be officially acknowledged. If there was a way to identify them, to help them find resources... Colonel, you're talking about creating an unofficial support network for classified veterans. That's a significant operational undertaking. Yes, sir. But it's also the right thing to do. Webb chuckled. Colonel, in 8 years of serving under my command, you never once chose the easy path when the hard path was more ethical. I'm not surprised you're doing the same thing now. Is that authorization, sir? That's authorization to proceed with Phase 2 of your mission, Colonel. Help the ones who can't be officially helped. Build the networks that officially don't exist. Just remember to maintain operational security. Understood, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Colonel, for choosing service over recognition again. After the call ended, Maya sat in the quiet of her apartment and felt something she hadn't experienced since before Operation Crosswind collapsed. Purpose that aligned perfectly with capability. Maya Carter would decline the federal recognition. The Carter Veterans Resource Center would continue operating as an independent nonprofit, helping veterans through programs that worked precisely because they weren't constrained by official bureaucracy. But more than that, Maya would begin reaching out to other veterans whose service couldn't be acknowledged, whose struggles couldn't be officially recognized, whose need for community was complicated by the classified nature of their sacrifices. It would be dangerous work. It would require careful operational security. It would mean building trust with people who'd been trained never to trust anyone completely. But it would also mean that no veteran would have to carry the weight of classified service alone. Maya picked up a pen and began writing a list of names other operators she'd served with, people whose covers had been blown or who'd transitioned out of the classified world into civilian lives that didn't understand what they'd sacrificed. It was time to bring the ghosts home. The phone call came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, which was exactly when Maya expected it. The voice on the other end was young, female, and carefully controlled in the way that suggested someone fighting to maintain composure. Is this Maya Carter? The Maya Carter who runs the Veterans Center in Portland? Maya sat up in bed, instantly alert. This is Maya. Who's asking? My name is Captain Sarah Chen. I need help, ma'am, and I was told you're someone who understands complicated situations. Maya reached for the notebook she kept by her bedside. Captain Chen, are you in immediate danger? No, ma'am, not physical danger, but my cover was blown 6 months ago. I've been trying to transition back to regular life, but the Army doesn't know what to do with me. My service record is classified, so I can't get proper benefits. My real identity is compromised, so I can't go back to my old unit, and I've been sleeping in my car for 3 weeks. Maya closed her eyes. She'd heard variations of this story dozens of times over the past 5 years, ever since she'd started quietly building the network Webb had authorized. Captain, where are you right now? Rest stop outside of Seattle. I drove down from Joint Base Lewis McChord. Someone there gave me your number, said you might be able to help. I can help. But first, I need you to understand something. The help I can provide operates outside official channels. Are you comfortable with that? Ma'am, official channels are what got me sleeping in my car. At this point, I'm comfortable with whatever actually works. Maya smiled slightly. Captain, I'm going to give you an address. It's a safe house in Seattle that we maintain for situations like yours. Clean bed, secure communications, food, and people who understand what you're going through. Can you drive there now? Yes, ma'am. Maya provided the address and the proper contact protocols. Captain, when you get there, tell them Ghost sent you. They'll know what that means. There was a pause. Ghost? Ma'am, were you? I was someone who fell through the same cracks you're falling through now. The difference is that now we have systems in place to catch people before they hit bottom. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. After the call ended, Maya made 2 more calls. The first was to the safe house in Seattle, alerting them to expect Captain Chen. The second was to Tom Bradley, who now ran the network's operations coordination from Portland. Tom, we've got another one. Captain Sarah Chen, probably special operations given the security concerns. Blown cover, compromised identity, sleeping in her car. Tom's voice was alert despite the early hour. I'll activate the Seattle team. Full support package? Full package. And Tom, have them run the advanced screening. If Captain Chen is who I think she is, she's going to need more than transitional assistance. Understood. Maya, that's the 4th one this month. Word is definitely getting out about the network. Maya looked out her bedroom window at the dark Portland streets. Good. That means we're reaching the people who need us most. Over the next 2 days, Maya coordinated Captain Chen's intake through secure channels. The young officer was exactly what Maya had suspected, R.T. Ko, a psychological operations specialist who'd been operating under deep cover in Syria until her position was compromised by a security leak. She'd been extracted safely, but had fallen into the bureaucratic gap between classified and conventional military systems. By the end of the week, Captain Chen had been placed in transitional housing, connected with appropriate medical and psychological support, and enrolled in a specialized job training program designed for veterans with security, clearances, but no traditional resume. More importantly, she'd been welcomed into a community of veterans who understood exactly what she'd sacrificed and why it mattered, even if they could never discuss the details. Maya was reviewing Chen's case file when Tom knocked on her office door. Maya, we need to talk. I just got off a call with one of our contacts at the Pentagon. Maya looked up. Good news or bad news? Complicated news. They want to meet with you, officially. Maya set down the file. Define they. Joint Chiefs level. They want to discuss formalizing the network, bringing it under official oversight, providing federal funding and recognition. Maya leaned back in her chair. 5 years ago, I turned down federal recognition because it would have compromised our ability to help people who couldn't be officially helped. What makes them think that's changed? Tom sat down across from her. Because what we've built is working too well to ignore. We're processing classified veterans more efficiently than any official program. We're maintaining better operational security than most government agencies, and we're doing it with almost zero bureaucratic overhead. So they want to co-opt our effectiveness and turn it into a bureaucracy. That's my read on the situation. Maya stood and walked to her window, looking out at the Carter Veterans Resource Center's main building. 5 years of careful growth had created a network that spanned 12 cities, employed over 200 people, and had helped nearly 4,000 veterans transition successfully out of classified service. It was also completely unofficial, operated through private funding, and maintained through personal relationships rather than government contracts. Tom set up the meeting, but make sure they understand that this is a consultation, not a negotiation. The network stays independent regardless of what they offer. And if they make threats instead of offers, Maya smiled. Then we remind them that this network is staffed entirely by people who've operated successfully in hostile environments. Bureaucratic pressure is considerably less intimidating than enemy fire. The meeting took place 1 week later in a nondescript conference room at the Portland Federal Building. Maya arrived to find 3 people waiting for her, a Navy admiral she didn't recognize, an Army colonel who looked familiar, and a civilian in an expensive suit who radiated the particular authority that came from high-level intelligence work. Ms. Carter, the admiral said, standing as she entered, thank you for agreeing to meet with us. I'm Admiral Patricia Reyes, Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Intelligence. This is Colonel James Morrison from Army Special Operations Command and Mr. David Kim from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Maya shook hands with each of them, noting their body language and assessing their intentions through habits that would never fully fade. Gentlemen, ma'am, she said, taking her seat, I understand you wanted to discuss the Veteran Transition Network. Admiral Reyes opened a thick file folder. Ms. Carter, in the past 5 years, your organization has processed 3,847 veterans with classified service histories. You've maintained a 97% success rate for transitional placement and a 0% rate for security violations. That's more effective than any official program we've ever operated. Maya nodded. We have advantages that official programs don't have, such as trust. Veterans with classified backgrounds don't trust official systems because official systems have often failed them. They trust us because we operate in the same spaces they do, our boas, between recognition and necessity, between official policy and practical need. Colonel Morrison leaned forward. Ms. Carter, we'd like to formalize that trust. Bring your network under official oversight, provide federal funding, and expand your operations nationwide. And in exchange? Mr. Kim spoke for the first time, his voice carefully neutral. Accountability, oversight, integration with existing veteran services, standardization of procedures. Maya smiled. In other words, bureaucracy. The exact thing that makes us effective would be eliminated in favor of the exact things that make official programs ineffective. Admiral Reyes frowned. Ms. Carter, we're offering substantial resources, full federal funding, official recognition, the ability to help thousands more veterans. Admiral, let me ask you a question. When Captain Sarah Chen called our hotline at 3 a.m. last Tuesday because she was sleeping in her car after her cover was blown, how long would it have taken an official program to help her? Admiral Reyes consulted her file. According to standard procedures, initial assessment would take 72 hours, security clearance verification another week, and placement in appropriate programs, 2 to 3 weeks minimum. We had her in secure housing within 6 hours and enrolled in comprehensive support within 48 hours. No paperwork, no bureaucratic delays, no security clearance investigations, just veterans helping veterans. Colonel Morrison nodded. That's exactly the efficiency we want to formalize. Colonel, the moment you formalize it, it stops being efficient. The moment you add oversight, you add delays. The moment you require accountability reports, you require staff time that could be spent helping veterans. The moment you integrate with existing systems, you inherit all the problems that make those systems ineffective. Mr. Kim leaned back in his chair. Ms. Carter, are you declining our offer? Maya met his gaze steadily. I'm declining to compromise the effectiveness of a system that works in order to satisfy the bureaucratic needs of systems that don't work. Admiral Reyes closed her file. Ms. Carter, we could make this difficult for you. Funding sources could dry up, regulatory scrutiny could increase, official cooperation could cease. Maya's expression didn't change. Admiral, this network is staffed by people who've operated successfully in environments considerably more hostile than federal bureaucracy. We've been working without official cooperation for 5 years. We've never relied on funding sources that could be easily compromised, and regulatory scrutiny is exactly the kind of challenge that makes former special operations personnel more effective, not less. She stood. But more than that, Admiral, every person in our network chose service over comfort, mission success over personal recognition, and effectiveness over official approval. Threatening us is like threatening people to do exactly what they've already chosen to do. Colonel Morrison stood as well. Ms. Carter, we're not trying to be adversarial here. We genuinely want to help more veterans. Then stop interfering with the people who are already helping them effectively. Maya walked toward the door, then paused. Colonel, if you really want to help veterans, focus on fixing the official systems that keep failing them. Make the VA more responsive, streamline the bureaucracy, reduce the red tape, but don't try to fix a system that's working by turning it into a system that isn't. After Maya left, the 3 officials sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Admiral Reyes spoke. Assessment? Colonel Morrison reviewed his notes. She's not going to compromise, and frankly, she shouldn't. Their system works precisely because it's not our system. Mr. Kim nodded slowly. Recommendation? We leave them alone, Admiral Reyes said. Monitor from a distance, provide indirect support when possible, but don't interfere. Sometimes the most effective oversight is no oversight at all. Maya stood at the podium in the main auditorium of the Carter Veterans Resource Center, looking out at an audience of 200 people. Veterans, family members, volunteer coordinators, and staff from across the country had gathered for the network's 10th anniversary celebration. But this wasn't just a celebration. It was also Maya's retirement announcement. 10 years ago, she began, I opened a small veteran center in Portland because I believed that every veteran deserves support that understands their service, regardless of whether that service can be publicly acknowledged. Today, our network operates in 47 cities, employs over 800 people, and has helped more than 20,000 veterans transition successfully into civilian life. The audience applauded, but Maya raised a hand for silence. But the real measure of our success isn't in numbers. It's in the fact that Captain Sarah Chen, who called our hotline 10 years ago from a rest stop while sleeping in her car, now runs our entire Pacific Northwest operation. It's in the fact that Tom Bradley, who came to us homeless and broken, has personally helped over 300 veterans find their footing. It's in the fact that we've created a community where service is understood, sacrifice is honored, and no veteran has to carry their weight alone. She paused, gathering her thoughts for what came next. I'm announcing today that I'm stepping down as director of the Carter Veterans Resource Center. After 10 years of building this network, it's time for new leadership to take it into the next decade. The audience stirred with surprise and murmurs of concern. I'm not leaving because the mission is complete. I'm leaving because the mission has evolved beyond what any one person can manage. This network now includes capabilities and reach that require leadership with different skills than the ones I brought to the table. Maya gestured toward the side of the stage. Tom Bradley will be taking over as national director, with Sarah Chen as deputy director for operations. Together, they represent everything this network stands for. Veterans who've been through the worst, found their way back, and dedicated their lives to helping others do the same. Tom and Sarah joined Maya at the podium, both looking slightly overwhelmed by the applause from the audience. But I'm not disappearing entirely, Maya continued. I'm returning to what I do best, Abio Puru, working directly with individual veterans who've fallen through the cracks. I'm establishing a specialized unit that will focus on the hardest cases, the people who don't fit any existing categories, the veterans who need help that can't be provided through any official channels. She looked directly at Tom and Sarah. The network you're inheriting is strong, independent, and effective because it's never compromised its core mission for convenience or recognition. I trust you to keep it that way. After the ceremony, Maya found herself on the center's rooftop deck, looking out over Portland as the sun set behind the mountains. Tom joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. You okay with this decision? He asked. 10 years of building something from nothing, and you're walking away. Maya accepted the coffee and leaned against the railing. Tom, I didn't build this to be my legacy. I built it to be a solution to a problem that shouldn't exist. The problem still exists, but now there's a proven solution that can operate without me. And the specialized unit you mentioned? Maya smiled. There are veterans out there who've fallen so far through the cracks that they can't even access our services. People whose situations are so complicated that our standard procedures can't help them. That's where I can make the most difference now. Tom nodded slowly. The ones who are too classified for the Classified Veterans Network. Exactly. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights begin to flicker on as darkness settled over Portland. Maya, Tom said finally, can I ask you something I've never asked before? Go ahead. Who were you really? Before Maya Carter, before the logistics specialist cover story, before any of this, who were you in the classified world? Maya was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but certain. I was someone who believed that the mission mattered more than recognition, that effectiveness mattered more than authority, and that taking care of your people was the highest responsibility of command. She looked at Tom. I'm still that person. The only thing that's changed is the uniform. Tom nodded. That's what I thought. As the night deepened, Maya looked out over the city where she'd rebuilt her life, found her purpose, and created something that would outlast her. Tomorrow, she would begin the next phase of her mission. Chawiyu, reaching the unreachable, helping the unhelpable, serving the people who'd been forgotten by every system designed to serve them. It wasn't the recognition she'd once earned in classified operations. It wasn't the official acknowledgement she'd been denied in courtrooms, but it was service, and service had always been enough. Maya Carter, whose real name would remain classified forever, smiled and headed home to prepare for another mission. The work would continue. If you've enjoyed this complete story of Maya Carter's journey from disgrace to redemption to legacy, please subscribe and share this video with someone who needs to hear that every veteran's service matters, whether it can be publicly acknowledged or not. And in the comments below, tell us where you're watching from and share the name of a veteran who made a difference in your life. Let's honor them together, because these stories of quiet courage and hidden sacrifice need to be told. The Maya Carters of the world walk among us every day. Apu, serving in silence, helping without recognition, choosing mission success over personal glory. They deserve our respect, our support, and our commitment to ensure that no veteran ever has to fight alone. Thank you for watching, and remember, the greatest heroes are often the ones whose stories never make it into the history books, but whose actions change the world one life at a time.